Okay, hi, Assalamualaikum, Min Nazihah here. So today we're going to talk about chapter 4. So before we begin our lecture for today, let's begin with Ummul Kitab Al-Fatihah. Okay, so chapter 4 for our syllabus includes the appraisals of property investment. So these are the subtopics under chapter 4. However, I will only just talk about a little bit on the introduction. So what is basically a discounted cash flow, and I also will show you the calculation of net present value or the NPV. Meanwhile, the other subtopic that would be include the internal rate of return, equivalent yield, and also equated yield. All the calculations will be done face to face. Okay, so first thing first, what is actually appraisal? So what would be the difference between valuation and appraisal? So valuations for chapter 1 and chapter 2, what you did is you do the valuation, or you determine the capital value for each interest in property investment. So you have your capital value for your freeholders interest, you have the capital value for the leaseholder interest, and you also do the valuations for the capital value of subleaseholder interest. However, for appraisal, it is beyond the valuation, because now you need to advise your client what would be the worth of your property investments. So appraisal is basically an estimations the worth of property investment, whether the investment is worth to proceed or whether it is not worth to proceed. So how are we going to do the appraisal? We can do so by using the DCF or the discounted cash flow. What actually is discounted? Discounted means you want to know what would be the worth of your investment today. Or you probably know the word present value, PV, which means the money received today is better than the money received in the future. So what is actually cash flow? So cash flow, or in Malay aliran tunai, basically means what would be the cash coming in or coming out. So coming in basically means positive, you receive your cash, and money going out means basically a negative cash flow. That means the property investments is have to pay for the expenses. But if let's say coming in, so the investors receive money probably in terms of the rental. So what is the use of the discounted cash flow? How can we know whether our investment is worth to proceed or whether it is not worth to proceed? We can do so by using the two principal methods. First is the net present value, and second is the internal rate of return. So for net present value, if your investment produce a positive net present value, that means the investment is worth to proceed. Or in other words, the investment is giving or produce a profit. While if it is negative net present value, so that means the property will produce a loss. So why should we proceed with the investment if we know that in the future that the investment is a loss? Okay, so that would be the net present value. Secondly is the internal rate of return. So the internal rate of return can be either in terms of the equivalent yield or the equated yield. So for equated and equivalent, we must the big difference would be in terms of the rental growth. I will talk about the internal rate of returns later on. Okay, to sum up what we have learned previously, so the discounted cash flow can either be used to determine the net present value or the NPV, or to determine the internal rate of return or the IRR. So the net present value will be in the form of RM, Ringgit Malaysia. So like I said before, if the net present value is positive, so that means the property investment produce a profit. If the net present value is a negative, so that means the investment is not producing profit. It will produce a loss. If the net present value is equal to 0, so that means that the investment is not having a loss and also not having a profit. Okay, now for the internal rate of return, just like what we learned in chapter 2 or the total yield, where the IRR could either be in the form of equated or equivalent yield. So the IRR must be in percentage. So for example, whether the IRR is 5% or 10%, that depends on the calculations that you have made. So for IRR, the higher the return, the higher the profit. So 10%, of course, the IRR will produce more profit if as compared to the 5% of IRR. Okay, so for this video, I will only talk about how to determine the net present value using the discounted cash flow. Okay, so before we proceed with the DCF, there are three important things that we need to know about the discount rate. So in valuation, the rate that is important to know is the all risk yield, ARY, which basically means rental value divided by capital value times 500. Okay, now in DCF, if you want to know about the net present value, then this three discount rate must be identified. Okay, so the first one is the borrowing rate. Borrowing rate is the interest rate that should be paid to the bank or to the financial institution because you borrow the money from them. So that is the expenses or from the interest that you need to pay. Okay, so that is the borrowing rate. Second discount rate is the opportunity rate. So the opportunity rate is the best and safe rate available in the investment market. So basically means opportunity when you have to give up other alternative investment because you want to invest in this property. Okay, so what other investment are available in the market? Let's say the unit trust now is producing 5%. So you want to compare that 5% from the unit trust with your property investment. So that is the opportunity rate. The third discount rate would be the target rate. Target rate means that the investors required certain amount of percentage to become the target rate. Okay. For example, let's say my target rate is 10%. I would not proceed the investment if the investment is lower than 10%. Or let's say you prefer the target rate as 5%. So you can proceed with the investment if the investment produce 5%. Okay, or more than 5%. But I would not agree with you. I said no, I would not accept 5% as my target rate. I would be willing to take the risk because I want more profit. So the target rate is different from one investor to another investor. Why do I willing to take a higher return or higher profit? Because I'm willing to take the risk. So these target rates to compensate the risk and also the loss of the immediate consumption and also the factors of inflation. So these are the three discount rates that used in the discounted cash flow in order to determine the net present value. So it can either be in the form of borrowing rate, opportunity cost rate, and also the target rate. Okay, now let's see an example. Okay, let's say in the investment market, there are 5 investment options that you can choose. So we have investment A, B, C, D, and also E. Okay, so we know that this investment, each of them produce different IRR and different net present value. Okay, and we know that the investors has borrowed money from the bank. So the bank say, of course, you have to pay back the money. It also plus the expenses of the borrowing, or we call it borrowing cost. Okay, now the borrowing rate is 8% per annum. Okay, since we have 5 investments here, we would say if we choose an investment which has a lower rate than 8%, then we are going to be in a trouble, because we have to pay the bank at 8% per annum. So at least we need 8% and above in order to get a profit. So if we choose investment C, D, and E, that means we are having a loss when we look at the internal rate of return. Internal rate of return for investment C is 5.3%. So that is lower than 8%. So it is not worth to proceed with investment C. And so is to investment D and E, because investment D produce 0% of IRR, and also investment E is having a negative 2.4% of IRR. So first we can have a look on the internal rate of return. Okay, now we look at the investment A and investment B. So investment B produce 8%. Yes, it is the same rate with the borrowing rate, but we want at least a profit. So investment A would be the best investment to choose and to proceed by looking at the internal rate of return. Okay, another aspect to look is by using the net present value. We know that if the investment produce a positive net present value, that means the investment is producing profit. If not, negative present value would mean that the investment is having a loss. While the net present value equivalent to 0, that means that the investment is neither having a profit or neither having a loss. So investment A would be the best investment to choose from by looking at the net present value and also the IRR. Let's recap what we have learned so far. So we know now that the discounted cash flow, or the DCF, can be used to determine the IRR and also the NPV. So the net present value is the total present value of the revenue of the cash that coming in, okay, minus by the present value of expenditure. Expenditure basically means what would be the expenses or the money going out. So the net cash flow will be used at the end. Okay. In order to derive the value of the net present value, of course, we need to use the discount rate. The discount rate can either be in the form of only one from these 3 rates. So the first one would be the borrowing rate, second one would be the opportunity rate, and third one would be the target rate. So at least we want the investment that produce the NPV positive, because that means that the investment produce profit. So it is worth to proceed, worth undertaking the investment. Okay, let's say there is 2 investment, as the NPV that produce 0 and NPV that produce negative NPV. Which one do you think is worth undertaking? Either the 0 or the negative? Yes, 0 is much more worth undertaking than the negative because the negative NPV is having a loss. But if let's say the NPV is more than 0, of course, straight away you will choose that investment because that is the best investment to choose. So the greater the NPV, the better the investment would be. So contrary, if the NPV is negative, so it shows that the investor is having a loss. Okay, so now let's have a look on the calculation of the NPV. So how are we going to use the discounted cash flow to determine the net present value? So the question is, calculate the NPV if the property rental income is 12,000 ringgit per annum net. So you don't have to do anything with the rent because it is already per annum and it is already net. So we have 5 years unexpired terms, and then we have the investor's target rate is 10%. The rental value is 18,000 per annum. The all resale is 7%. Okay, and then the questions also stated that the capital invested for the subject property is 200,000 ringgit. Okay, the first thing that you need to know or you need to do is to do this table. Okay, so now the first column would be the year column. For the year, you have to use the unexpired term. So for in this question, the unexpired term is 5 years. So you need to do year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And once after 5, you should state the word reversion because we are the property now is revert back to the owner. So after the term has expired, so we use reversion. Okay, now the second column. Second column is the rental. Okay, so rental for year 1 until year 5 would be the rental received from the tenant. So in this question, the rental received is 12,000 ringgit. So you have to write down 12,000 ringgit from year 1 until year 5. Okay, so during the reversion, so we need to put the rental value. So in this case, the rental value is 18,000 ringgit per annum. Okay. Now, moving on to the third column. The third column would be the YP in perpetuity at ARY. So, during the term, we do not use this formula, but we only use this formula for reversion. So, the YP in perpetuity is 1 divided by ARY. So 1 divided by 0.07. So that would be the answers given there, 14.2857. Okay, so now let's go to the fourth column. So the fourth column would be the formula of present value. So in net present value, the DCF, we will need to use the discount rate. Now, the discount rate can either be in the form of borrowing rate, opportunity rate, or the target rate. Since the target rate is given by the question at 10%, so we need to use that 10% inside the present value. So you have to look at the present value Paris book, buku Perry, for year 1. So now once you look inside the book, you would find 0.9091. Okay, don't forget to take 4 decimal place for this present value. Continue with year 2. So year 2, you just look inside your Perry. the present value for 10% for year 2 would be 0.8264. Proceed with year 3. Look inside the Paris book. 10% and is 3 years. That will be 0.7513. Okay, so proceed until year 5. That would be 0.6209. Okay, now please make sure that you do not make mistakes at the reversion. Okay, so for reversion, you must take the deferred. Remember when we said the reversion, YP in perpetuity, deferred how many years? Deferred 5 years, because the term expired 5 years. So for reversion, the present value that we would use is I is the 10%, N is 5 years because deferred 5 years, right? So the present value for reversion would be 0.6209. Okay, so that is the fourth column. Now we are going to look at the total PV. Total present value means the column from the cash flow, then you times by the present value. Okay, for year 1, the total present value or the total PV is 12,000, and then you times by 0.9091. That gives you 10,909. Okay, so for year 2, you times 12,000, you times by 0.8264, so that would be 9917. Continue until year 5. Okay, for reversion, please don't make mistakes. Okay, when you want to calculate the present value. Okay, now the for reversion, it's 18,000 times by YP in perpetuity. That would be 14.2857. Deferred 5 years, right? So times by 0.6209. That would bring you to 159,660. Okay, so you sum up, you add up from year 1 until reversion. The total net present value would be 205,197 ringgit. Okay, so that would be the total NPV. Total NPV is basically all the present value from year 1 until reversion. Okay, now moving on to the capital invested. Once you get the net present value, you have to minus your capital invested. Capital invested basically means the money for your subject property. In other words, it could be in the form of the offer price for the subject property, or the capital for the subject property. Please do not make mistake. You cannot use the capital value of other property, because we want to know our property net present value. So in this case, the question has given that the capital invested for the subject property is 200,000. So you minus 200,000 from the total NPV. So the net present value is 5,197 ringgit. So this basically means that you can advise the investors that if you want to proceed with this investment, with this property investment, the net present value is 5,197 ringgit. Do not round up. Why is I know that you're going to say, Miss, do we have to round it up? No. Okay, so the net present value is 1597. So this shows that this investment produce profit. So you have to advise lah. The investor said that, okay, if you want to proceed with the investment is profitable. Okay, let's say if the NPV is negative, of course lah, you do not invest. You advise your investor, you advise your client, say that please do not proceed with this investment because it produces negative. Okay, so that's how you calculate your NPV. Okay, now, so let's do some tutorial, some exercise. I want to know whether you understand this topic or not. Okay, so the tutorial would be, what would be the NPV if the property is let to a tenant for 6 years? So the rental received is 15,000 ringgit per annum net. The rental value is 18,000 ringgit per annum. All risk yield is 6%. The target rate of return is 10%. And the offered price is 300,000 ringgit. So do we proceed with this investment or not? Okay, so you have to show me the calculation for this NPV. Okay, after you get that answer, proceed with the same question, but now I change it to the investor's target rate. Instead of 10%, I change to 7%, and also I change to 8%. So is the investment will produce a positive, or will the investment produce a negative NPV? So you need to show me the calculation. Okay, remember, like I said before, the target rate for investor is different. Probably some investors want 10%, another investors would want 7% or 8%. So you need to advise. If 10%, can we proceed with the investment? Is the NPV positive? Or if the target rate is 7%, can we still proceed with the investment? Okay, so you need to upload your answer in Island. So all the best, good luck, I'll see you next week. So that would be the end for this video slides presentation. So to sum up, what we learned today is what is actually appraisals and what is actually discounted cash flow. So we know that discounted cash flow can be used to determine whether it is worth to undertake the investment or whether it is worth to proceed with the investment. Okay, so the DCF can be used to determine the IRR. The higher the return means the higher the profit, or we can use it to determine the net present value. Again, a positive NPV means that the investment is profitable. Okay, so for this video, I will only stop until the net present value. I will continue the other topic, that will be how to calculate the IRR, whether in the form of equivalent or the equated yield, next week. I miss you already. See you next week. Bye. Hope you enjoy this. Assalamualaikum.